Hello there, I'm Carole Stone and I'm delighted to be chairing this global conversation on International Women's Day. To my surprise, many people have already sent me lovely congratulations in the sense of congratulations on being a woman and let's make this a special day and obviously a special year. So we're going to talk about diversity, about resilience, what women can do to make the world, I always call it, a better place, a safer place and a better place to live. What do you think journalists can do? What can we do? Any one thing, say if at the end of this day or this year, we've done this in making the diversity, the drivers of change, the resilience, anything you like?
Well, I mean, it's everything's about communication, isn't it? You can do a great deal of work, but the only way people will learn and be able to follow suit or copy some good practices through communication. So yes, journalism's vital. Obviously, having a free media is very important as well to raise the issues that you've just mentioned, that we're seeing in the Ukraine, obviously, at the moment. So yes, it's vital that our media industry is as robust as possible, and that it continues, it's healthy, and that the amount of the journalism is out there. But so yes, we need to encourage people to pay for decent content as well.
Well, the media is very important in terms of telling the story. I say in terms of activism, there's the three letters A, B, and C. A is for the activist who raises their awareness, and B is the broadcaster in order to be able to get the social change and communicate that to the change makers, which are politicians. So ultimately, when women are allowed to tell their stories, and they're allowed to tell those stories without any fear or any prejudice, it means that real change can happen. And I've seen that in the sense of how powerful the Evening Standard, the BBC, and other free pieces of journalism have been in terms of really trying to get us to understand an aggressive form of violence which has been ignored for too long. So if it wasn't for free media and if it wasn't for women, actually it was Sarah Sands at the time who was the head of the Evening Standard, who was the editor of the Evening Standard, a woman took interest in the subject. So I think women in leadership and women in leadership in media actually really matter for those of us that don't necessarily get to be heard.
What sort of things do you write for the Evening Standard? What's your sort of topics?
I wish I could write freely and write about, dating in London, but that's not what I do. It's just like I write the topical. So today I wrote about International Women's Day and how I was sandwiched between Mel B of the Spice Girls and the Duchess of York, the Duchess of Cornwall, which I think that's the kind of space that I'm in at the moment, which is quite weird from a child who came to this country as a child refugee, now to be able to have a voice in a national newspaper. I think it's something that's really important. So I talk about things that really matter, whether it's racism post the pandemic, whether it's like, again, being a refugee and having seen civil war, and the idea that I think a lot of people in London specifically actually really understand the plight of those that are in Ukraine at the moment, because London has been a hub and a home to many people who fled war.
I remember late Sue Lloyd-Roberts, the journalist,
yes,
and she was very, very interested in what you're interested in FMG and how we can do it. What would you say since then? That must have been several years ago. What has really happened that's given you more hope, and what encouraged you to set up the Five Foundation?
The Five Foundation, yes.
So why is it called the Five Foundation?
Yeah, so basically, Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is gender equality, and I do actually believe in order for us to be able to achieve any of the Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's ending poverty, ending hunger, any of those things, I think we have to be able to focus on an equal world. And I think until we have gender equality, I don't think any of the other things are going to be achieved. And Sue and I work together, and she has a very I think I would ask everybody to watch a clip of when she went to Gambia, where we ended up getting FGM banned, actually. And she was having a conversation with a cleric, and this was aired on the BBC on Newsnight, where the fact that the cleric was misinformed about the female anatomy and how apparently women who haven't undergone FGM leak and can kind of orgasm at the touch of a just by going past the man. And she said a very iconic line, which was like, I've had a clitoris for 65 years and this has happened to me. So that was a moment to actually really understand that women who have lived without FGM could actually speak on behalf of and support other women, and actually really correct somebody who has had this vision where the fact that in order to carry out FGM was to prevent women from basically being aroused by walking around men. So Sue was an incredible activist, an incredible advocate, and somebody who pushed things forward. Thanks to her and a lot of the other work that was done by the coalition government, we now have stronger legislation against FGM here in the UK. And the UK was the first government internationally to fund the issue specifically, but none of that money is still getting to the front line. And that's why I do what I do, is to try to get money to women who are the true activists who are on the front line on the continent of Africa.
Good for you. Anna, you've got a lovely job, Chief Content Officer of the Evening Standard.
Yeah.
Tell me, which bit of it do you think you can make sure goes into the Evening Standard to really encourage all these things we're thinking of? We are the thinkers of the UK here at this panel.
I think it's twofold. I think encouraging young people into journalism is really important. When I first started in journalism, there wasn't such a great culture around older women. They'd often be quite sort of displeased to see young women around, I think, because they probably had to fight very hard. So I think it's very nice to welcome everyone into journalism, and make sure everyone has a voice from lots of different places and backgrounds. And I also think just making sure you're telling lots of different stories, not keeping it too focused on one. You know, in the 90s, for example, when I first started in journalism, everything was about middle class, white, rich people, really. And I like to think we've moved a long way away from that. Maybe not as far as we need to, but it's still, I think there's been a lot of change in terms of reflecting what people are interested in, trying to tell the stories of our readers, be more inclusive.
Good, thank you. And Abbianca, I think of you as an activist. I don't know why. I know you work a lot in communities. What is it that sort of fired you to be a journalist? And what do you want to get out of what we're doing through International Women's Day, bringing all these issues to the fore?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of why I wanted to be a journalist, because I saw how, I guess, powerful storytelling can be. I mean, I used to read David Cohen's investigations and so many other brilliant investigative journalists like Jane Bradley, and some of the work they were able to do could change laws or make a real impact. And that's what I wanted to do, particularly growing up in an area where you're constantly hearing about youth violence and all these other things. I wanted to be on the forefront of the news agenda, telling these stories, but also ensuring that different communities are on the front pages. And I think everyone's made like amazing points in regards to how the industry can do better and obviously support women. I definitely say we need more women in leadership and in editor positions, because at the end of the day, senior editors do have a say in what the final products will be. So having more women in those positions, and also ensuring that as women we are supporting one another. So once you are in that position, how are you then ensuring to support the young reporter that's not in that position yet, and just providing that safe space so that they can also come to you for guidance and for that support. So I would say that's definitely a factor that needs to be taken into consideration, and just us as women supporting one another in the best way that we can. And also noting that one woman doesn't necessarily represent all. So if I were an editor, I don't represent every woman that's out there. So it would be important for me to reach out to other women and say, look, this is what I was thinking of putting on the news agenda. Does this work? What stories do you have? And really working collaboratively together as women as well, once we're at that position.
Bias in the media towards women. I was at the BBC for many, many years. I can honestly say I was given farming programs to produce, and eventually Any Questions, and really programs that were as men as much as women, not Woman's Hour, although I did produce a couple of them. And do you think that there is now bias? Have you experienced it? Because I think there's a lot of things like poor old girl with wokeism, didn't mention this, and oh my goodness, you get so muddled up about it and so unfair, I think, in some cases. So do you feel the bias is still there?
I've been lucky enough to actually not come across a great deal of bias in newsrooms. I mean, they were sort of, when I first started 20 odd years ago, there were more men in the newsroom than there were women. However, I was given opportunities to go and report on different types of stories. I worked in investigations for a long time, which is, normally the preserve for male reporters. So, I would go and do door knocks on criminals without fear, and without my editor saying, you can't do that, you're a woman, it's dangerous. Whether or not the issues that are reported, whether there's bias within the actual stories. So without naming any names, you can sometimes newspapers will say something like she's just a housewife, or no, I'm only a mum, things like that. So I think having women in conference and on the back benches and in subbing scenarios as well as writers is really important to make sure that those things that aren't insignificant don't continue. So
would you agree with all of that, Anna?
I find it incredible that at the Daily Mirror 20 years ago you didn't experience any sexism from the men. That's wow. I mean, I would have thought newspapers, I think they were incredibly sexist places, certainly when I was starting out. That's not to say women weren't treated well, but in terms of the way women were portrayed and which women can be complicit in, of course, that awful, endless confessional journalism thing that women love doing that men wouldn't dream of going anywhere near can be a real poison chalice.
There's a lot of that.
And even today, if you read some of the weekly broadsheets, when a woman is on the cover, she'll be in a tiny little ball gown, whereas the man will be in a suit. So there's still that uncomfortable disconnect between how women choose to sexualize themselves when they're photographed, for example, which I think sometimes can be uncomfortable.
In other spheres, what about our politicians? What about the people who run our businesses? More women at the top in business. They're all role models for us. Do you think that's something that has encouraged you at all, Nimco? What do you think?
Yeah, it has. I think in order for you to become something, you have to be able to see it. And it was Nicola Sturgeon that once said the reason why she became a politician is because she saw Margaret Thatcher on TV. It wasn't the fact that she agreed with her politics, but she just saw a woman at the dispatch box. So I think it is actually really good to be able to see that. And now we've got incredible things such as a woman of colour on Countdown, all these other kind of spaces where you wouldn't see children that look like my niece or so on in kind of spaces. But I think coming back to the kind of the bias of the media, as someone that is of colour and has seen war and works in crisis on a day-to-day basis, I think it's been really interesting how the Ukraine conflict has been covered. It's like one of the key things is the fact that there have been brown and black people dying for the last decade at a disproportionate rate that they are dying in Ukraine at the moment, but there wasn't the same kind of outpouring or conversations that was kind of happening. So I think we also have to consistently be interested in the way that we consume media, and the people that are writing it are going to be writing for people that impact them and affect them. So even for us, when we're talking about issues like FGM or whether it's domestic violence or anything like that, it is really hard to find somebody to take the sensitive conversation in those things. Everybody always wants to sensationalize it because that's what sells. But I really actually found that actually really telling the personal story and taking the time to work with survivors and people to get the better product at the end of the day. So yeah, ultimately seeing where women empowered does help, and it does contribute to the change of society. But I think we also have to really understand that the media is not as brilliant and as diverse as we think it is.
One thing that I guess could be improved, whether in journalism or other sectors, is actually providing some sort of safe space where your employees or particularly women can actually feel comfortable saying this is what has happened. Because as we know, the bias is taking place. It has been taking place for a long time, whether it's microaggressions, stereotypes, whatnot. But is there a system in place where someone can come and say, this is what happened, and I want to talk to someone about it because it's affecting how I can work and what I can do. So I think as women, that's something we do need to take into consideration, that this is a young female reporter or politician or whoever that's come into this space, and it might be difficult. So how do we provide that safe space? Is it having weekly sessions as women together and just interacting with one another a bit more, so that if something were to happen, she could feel very comfortable to say, look, this is what's happened. I don't know how to deal with it. So I think that's a more practical approach that a lot of industries should definitely be taking.
I suppose it's just about being able to listen. Now, do men listen as well as women do? I'm not sure. I think perhaps not. So it's getting your voice out there and sitting down and listening to people from with different viewpoints without judging. So when anyone's talking to you, you're immediately thinking what you're going to talk about next, rather than actually taking it in and listening to it. I mentor a young woman in terms of journalism, and the best thing I can do when I'm talking to her is actually listen to her rather than tell her what I think she should be doing. And the more we talk, the more people can come up with their own solutions as well. So I think listening is a huge skill. I would say perhaps not everyone at the top of their profession in politics has particularly, but.
Can I ask you a question, sort of broaden it from media? Do you think media is doing better than other industries or not in terms of giving women opportunities? The legal profession is often said, and financial is similar, that they actually aren't doing as well as journalism. I don't know, but
do you want me to ask that question to make it work or not?
Well, no. What do you think, Carole? I'll ask you that question. Do you think other industries are?
I think they're doing pretty well. I think we're doing pretty well with women at the top in companies we never would have thought they would have been, even 5 or 6 years ago. I think that the media is doing well, but media is very much in the spotlight. We can see whether they're doing well.
Then how many women over 50 do you ever see in a newsroom? Because I think it's nothing. I think it would be infinitesimal. So, women literally they disappear.
Do they? But
just
what about columnists?
I mean, you can name the odd columnist, I suppose, but we're talking handfuls of people.
As opposed to male columnists and male people.
Well, it's not. I mean, I think it's more just executives, for example. That there really aren't many women past a certain age. They just fall off a cliff.
Why do you think that? What happens there? Is it a work balance thing? Is it?
Are they not wanted? I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's just something I've noticed for a long time. They're not there.
But
they're there in their 30s, they're there in their 40s. Then whoosh, not a single one.
Yeah, is that the case?
Weird,
is it possible that it's a case of coming through from a younger age that we haven't reached that position yet? I don't know.
Yes, that's a very good point.
And it may be that Abbianca's generation will come through.
I think that's a very good point.
And perhaps if this has only changed in the last 5-10 years, maybe, that there's still a movement coming through.
Definitely. I mean, there are certain areas within journalism that women just don't seem to work in, and that's what we need to improve. Politics, business, sport, tech, all of those things.
I think that's also to do with travel, and one of the things that you were saying, if there's anything that you could ask Boris or leadership right now would be universal childcare. I think the fact that men are don't have they can be easier to say, I need to travel with the Prime Minister, or I need to travel with this away game or this tech company or whatever it is. But for women, it's always like, who's going to look after the kids, who's going to look after the house and all these other things. So I think women are tied down with more domestic issues than men are. And we saw that during lockdown, where women and men were both working from home, but it was expected as though women were going to do the schooling, because that is just how it defaulted kind of conversation. So I think universal childcare is a massive kind of conversation that we could be having, and that's a way of actually also saving women doing the social care burden that falls on women in their mid and late 30s, because the whole point is they end up having children, taking time away from work, and then having to look after the grandparents, or the parents are getting older. So I don't think we've actually done that shared parenting, which I think would be the most equalising thing.
But then is there something strange going on in people's relationships? So, for example, I just say to my husband, we earn the same, doing the same childcare.
Yeah.
Why don't other people say that? I suppose when there is a financial inequality in earning, that's a much more difficult conversation.
And it's a social thing as well, because there's a lot of guys that try to take maternity leave and actually get that, what are you doing? And you're going to be breastfeeding. So there is still that kind of laddish kind of culture, in the sense that men think, I'm going to take the 2 weeks off and that's it, rather than actually taking, so sharing that maternity leave where you can actually have 50-50. So again, it's about really allowing, and I think we do children a disservice by not giving men the same credibility and the same opportunities in order to parent their children. So it's not just damaging on the father, I think it's also damaging on the child and society. So I think we don't have an honest conversation around parenting, and that's where women get basically sadly tied to the kitchen sink.
I think increasing paternity leave would be healthy for society, and also there is stigma around it still. If a man says he's taking 3 months paternity leave, people are amazed.
Yeah.
Well, I know we've concentrated a bit on media because this is an event of the Evening Standard and of the London Press Club. But if we should sort of bring it round now, we've talked a little bit about politicians and business. I mean, what are going to be the main challenges, do you think, of women leaders in whatever they're leading, or women in general, that we should hope that this time next year, for International Women's Day, might be solved? You got any thoughts on that?
I think complacency is the main thing. Is the fact that a lot of us think that we've already made it to the mountaintop, but we haven't. So in the US, that you can see access to contraception, access to safe and legal abortions is being threatened. Here in the UK, is the fact that the most progressive political party has never, the Labour Party can't actually elect a woman without having an all-female shortlist. So I think it's the whole point of actually really starting to see things of saying the fact that we still have a long way to go. And one of the things that I was saying about the diversity, which we don't actually congratulate, is the fact that we do at the moment have a government that has one of the most diverse front benches in the Western world, but those are things that we don't necessarily see. So I think we shouldn't get complacent, but we should also kind of congratulate ourselves for the way that we've kind of come. And another thing for me would be actually, how do we challenge and how do we deal with the rise of like hate on social media? Because I think it's fine to want to be a politician or want to be a leader, but the backlash that women of colour specifically face on online platforms, I think that's something that really puts women off going into the public office. And I know for one, I would never want to be an MP, because the fact that I just wouldn't be able to, I just wouldn't want to put myself in a situation where you're consistently attacked for actually daring to exist. So I think we just have to understand that we have a lot more work to do.
So Abbianca, Nimco, Dawn, and Anna, thank you very much indeed. I think our time is up. I hope we've had quite a good global conversation. And the International Women's Day, I should carry on saying good luck and best wishes in life to everybody today.